There was no warning, no siren, no droning engine overhead, no sound at all to tell you it was coming. One moment, an ordinary street on an ordinary evening. The next, a devastating explosion out of a clear sky, a shockwave, a crater where homes had stood. And only afterward, in a cruel reversal, came the scream of the thing's approach, the sound arriving after the explosion because the weapon had fallen faster than sound itself. It came from the edge of space, plunging down at tremendous speed, striking before anyone could hear it or see it or take cover. This was a weapon unlike anything the world had ever known, the first of a terrifying new kind, a herald of a new age of warfare. This is the true story of the world's first ballistic missile, the weapon that struck without warning. This is a story about a revolutionary and terrifying weapon, the first long-range ballistic missile, which introduced a new and frightening method of attack. It is a story about a technological breakthrough with a dark and terrible cost, and a legacy that would reshape the world. And it is a story grounded in the documented historical record, the true account of one of the most significant and sinister weapons of the war. A reference is provided in the description so you can verify these facts for yourself. To understand what made this weapon so terrifying, you have to understand how it differed from everything that had come before. Earlier, flying bombs could be heard as they approached, their engines droning through the sky, giving people at least some warning, some chance to take cover. And because they flew at speeds that aircraft could match, they could be intercepted and shot down. But this new weapon was something entirely different. It was a rocket, a ballistic missile, and it operated on a completely different principle. Launched vertically, it climbed high into the sky, arcing up to the very edge of space, and then plunged back down onto its target at a speed faster than sound. There was no engine droning as it approached, no warning of its coming, and no possibility of shooting it down. This weapon was the world's first long-range ballistic missile, a genuine technological revolution. It was the product of years of rocket research, developed by a team of scientists and engineers led by a brilliant rocket pioneer. Working at a secret research facility, this team had developed the technologies needed to build a large, liquid-fueled rocket capable of carrying a warhead over a long distance. The rocket was a marvel of engineering, incorporating breakthroughs in rocket propulsion, aerodynamics, and guidance. It represented a genuine leap forward in technology, the first weapon of its kind, a rocket that could strike targets hundreds of miles away, falling from the edge of space onto its target. Indeed, the rocket's flight took it so high that it reached the very edge of space, a remarkable achievement. In its trajectory, arcing high above the Earth before plunging down onto its target, the rocket climbed to altitudes never before reached by a human-made object, crossing into the boundaries of space itself. This was an extraordinary technological accomplishment, the first time that a human-made object had reached such heights. The same rocket that would rain destruction on cities was also a pioneering achievement in the history of spaceflight, the first object to touch the edge of space, a foreshadowing of the space age that would follow. Now this account is grounded in the documented historical record, one of the most significant weapons developments of the war. What follows is drawn from that record. The core is thoroughly documented. Germany did indeed develop and deploy the world's first long-range ballistic missile, a liquid-fueled rocket that struck its targets without warning at supersonic speed, launching thousands of them against enemy cities. The details are recounted to convey the nature of this revolutionary weapon, the terror it inflicted, and the dark cost of its creation. The way the rocket worked was a marvel of the engineering of its day. It was powered by a liquid fuel rocket engine, burning a combination of alcohol and liquid oxygen, which gave it the enormous thrust needed to climb into the sky and reach its target hundreds of miles away. Launched vertically, the rocket rose into the sky under the power of its engine. Then, following a preset trajectory, arced over and headed toward its target. It was guided by an advanced system that kept it on course, an early form of the guidance systems that would become standard in later missiles. And after climbing to the edge of space, the rocket plunged back down toward its target, striking at a speed faster than sound, delivering its warhead of high explosive with devastating effect. It was the speed of the rocket's descent that made it so uniquely terrifying, for it arrived faster than the sound of its own approach. Plunging down from the edge of space at supersonic speed, the rocket struck its target before the sound of its coming could be heard. There was no warning, no droning engine, no chance to take cover. The first sign of the rocket's arrival was the explosion itself, followed only afterward by the sound of its descent, a cruel reversal of the normal order. This meant that there was no defense against the rocket, no way to intercept it, no warning that would allow people to take shelter. It simply struck out of nowhere, delivering death and destruction without any warning at all. The impossibility of defending against the rocket was one of its most frightening characteristics. Earlier flying bombs could be shot down, intercepted by aircraft or anti-aircraft guns, but the rocket, plunging down from the edge of space at supersonic speed, could not be intercepted. There was no weapon that could reach it, no way to stop it once it was launched. This made it a weapon against which there was no defense, a terrifying prospect for those who lived under its threat. The only way to stop the rocket was to prevent it from being launched in the first place, to destroy or capture the sites from which it was fired. For once it was in the air, nothing could stop it from reaching its target. The rocket was deployed against enemy cities in a campaign of terror, launched from mobile platforms that were difficult to locate and attack. Beginning in the later part of the war, the rockets were fired against major cities, striking without warning and inflicting death and destruction. The first strikes came against two great cities, marking the beginning of a new era of warfare, the age of the ballistic missile. From then on, the rockets rained down on the targeted cities, each one striking without warning, delivering its deadly warhead out of a clear sky. The people of the targeted cities lived under the constant threat of a weapon that could strike at any moment, without any warning, against which there was no defense. The rockets caused significant death and destruction in the cities they struck. Each rocket delivered a substantial warhead of high explosive, and the impact of the supersonic descent added to its destructive power. The rockets killed thousands of people over the course of the campaign, striking homes, streets, and public places, bringing sudden death out of a clear sky. Beyond the physical destruction, the psychological impact was severe. The constant threat of a weapon that could strike without warning, against which there was no defense, weighing heavily on the population. The rockets were a weapon of terror, and they inflicted both physical destruction and psychological suffering on the cities they targeted. But the true horror of this weapon lay not only in the destruction it caused where it struck, but in the terrible human cost of its creation. And this is one of the darkest aspects of the entire story. The rockets were manufactured in large part in an underground factory, using the forced labor of concentration camp prisoners. These prisoners were compelled to work under brutal, inhuman conditions, in cold, dark tunnels, subjected to terrible treatment, malnutrition, and disease. The conditions were so horrific that enormous numbers of these prisoners died in the course of manufacturing the rockets, worked to death in the underground factory. The production of this weapon was, in itself, a monstrous crime, carried out through the suffering and death of countless prisoners. The scale of this human cost was staggering, and it produced a terrible irony. So many prisoners died building the rockets in the brutal conditions of the underground factory that the number who perished in the manufacture of the weapon actually exceeded the number killed by the rockets in their attacks on cities. In other words, this weapon killed more people in its making than in its use. It was a weapon whose very creation was a crime against humanity, built on the suffering and death of the prisoners forced to manufacture it. This terrible fact stands as one of the darkest aspects of the entire story, a reminder that behind the technological marvel lay a monstrous crime, the deaths of countless prisoners worked to death to produce the weapon. Despite being a revolutionary and terrifying weapon, the rocket did not change the outcome of the war. For all its technological sophistication and the terror it inflicted, it came too late and had too little strategic effect to alter the course of the conflict. The rocket was inaccurate, able to hit a city, but not to strike specific targets with precision. It was enormously expensive to produce, a drain on the resources of a regime that was already collapsing. And it was deployed only in the final period of the war, when Germany was already facing defeat. For all these reasons, the rocket, however frightening, could not turn the tide of the war, which continued on its course toward the defeat of Germany. It was a fearsome weapon, but not a decisive one. The campaign of rocket attacks was eventually brought to an end, largely through the advance of the Allied armies. Since the rocket could not be intercepted once launched, the only way to stop the attacks was to deny the enemy the sites from which the rockets were fired. As the Allied armies advanced, they overran the areas from which the rockets were launched, depriving the enemy of the ability to continue the attacks. With the loss of the launch sites, the campaign of rocket attacks came to an end. The terror of the weapon that struck without warning finally lifted as the launch areas fell to the advancing forces. Though the rocket did not change the outcome of the war, its legacy would prove immense, extending far beyond the conflict in which it was used. For the rocket was not only a weapon, but a pioneering technological achievement, the ancestor of the rockets and missiles that would shape the post-war world. After the war, the technology of the rocket and the scientists and engineers who had developed it were eagerly sought by the victorious powers, who recognized the significance of what had been achieved. The rocket's technology became the foundation for the development of the ballistic missiles and space rockets of the post-war era, its influence extending across the decades that followed. The legacy of the rocket extended in two directions, toward the weapons of the future and toward the exploration of space. On the one hand, the rocket was the ancestor of the ballistic missiles that would become central to the arsenals of the post-war powers, the forerunner of the intercontinental missiles that would define a new age of warfare. On the other hand, the same technology led to the development of the rockets that would carry humans into space, the ancestors of the launch vehicles that would eventually take people to the moon. In an extraordinary irony, the technology of a terror weapon, built through the suffering and death of prisoners, would within a few decades carry humanity into space and to the moon itself. The rocket that struck without warning was also the rocket that opened the door to the stars. What does the story of this weapon reveal about technology, warfare, and their moral dimensions? First and foremost, it demonstrates the way that technological breakthroughs can be turned to terrible purposes, the way that human ingenuity can be harnessed to weapons of destruction and terror. The rocket was a genuine technological marvel, a brilliant achievement of engineering, and yet it was created as a weapon of terror designed to bring sudden death to cities, and its production was carried out through a monstrous crime. This illustrates the double-edged nature of technology, the way that the same ingenuity that can achieve great things can also be turned to terrible purposes, and the importance of the moral choices that guide the use of technological power. The story also illustrates the terrible human cost that can lie behind the pursuit of a weapon, the suffering that can be inflicted in the name of military power. The production of the rocket, carried out through the forced labor and death of countless prisoners, was itself a crime of monstrous proportions, a reminder that behind the technological achievement lay immense human suffering. This illustrates the moral cost of the pursuit of weapons, the way that the drive to produce them can lead to terrible crimes, and the importance of remembering the human suffering that can lie behind the machines of war. The rocket's dark history is a sobering reminder of this cost. Consider, too, what the story reveals about the limits of even the most advanced weapons to change the course of a war. The rocket was a revolutionary weapon, terrifying and technologically sophisticated, and yet it could not alter the outcome of the conflict. It was too inaccurate, too expensive, and came too late to be decisive. This illustrates a recurring lesson of warfare, that even the most advanced weapons cannot, by themselves, win a war or reverse a losing situation, and that technological superiority in a single weapon is not enough to determine the outcome of a conflict. The rocket, for all its sophistication, could not save a regime that was already doomed. There is a profound irony here, too, in the way that a weapon of terror became the foundation for humanity's journey into space. The same technology that was used to bring sudden death to cities would, within a few decades, carry humans beyond the Earth and to the moon. This illustrates the complex and often paradoxical nature of technological development. The way that a technology developed for destruction can also open the door to extraordinary achievements. The rocket's dual legacy, as both a weapon of terror and the ancestor of the vehicles of space exploration, captures this paradox, a reminder of the complex ways in which technology can shape the world. It is worth reflecting, as well, on the way that the rocket marked the beginning of a new era of warfare, the age of the ballistic missile. Before the rocket, no weapon could strike distant targets from the edge of space without warning and without any possibility of defense. The rocket introduced this new and terrifying form of attack, and every long-range ballistic missile since has been built on the foundation it laid. The rocket thus marked a turning point in the history of warfare, the beginning of the missile age, a new era in which distant cities could be struck without warning by weapons plunging from the edge of space. Its shadow extends into our own time, in the ballistic missiles that remain a feature of the modern world. The story of the world's first ballistic missile stands as one of the most significant and sinister chapters in the history of the war, a testament to technological breakthrough, terrible human cost, and far-reaching legacy. It demonstrates the double-edged nature of technology, the moral cost that can lie behind the pursuit of weapons, the limits of even advanced weapons to change the course of a war, and the paradoxical legacy of a terror weapon that became the ancestor of the vehicles of space exploration. And it stands as an enduring reminder of both the heights of human ingenuity and the depths of human cruelty, embodied in a single weapon that struck without warning from the edge of space. So remember the world's first ballistic missile, the weapon that struck without warning. Remember what made it so terrifying, its supersonic descent from the edge of space, arriving faster than the sound of its own approach, against which there was no defense and no warning. Remember the terror it inflicted on the cities it struck, the sudden death out of a clear sky. But remember, above all, the dark cost of its creation, the countless prisoners worked to death in the underground factory, more of whom died building the weapon than were killed by it. And remember the deeper truths the story reveals about the double-edged nature of technology, about the moral cost that can lie behind the pursuit of weapons, and about the extraordinary paradox of a terror weapon that, within a few decades, would carry humanity to the moon. A reminder of both the heights of human ingenuity and the depths of human cruelty.